In the heart of rural Montana, where golden fields stretched as far as the eye could see and the air carried the faint scent of wild sage, Daniel Harper lived a quiet life. His ranch wasn't just a piece of land. It was his family's legacy. Generations before him had worked that soil, raised cattle, and built a home amid the rolling hills. For Daniel, every sunrise brought with it the promise of another day spent tending to his animals, fixing fences, or simply enjoying the peaceful solitude of nature. Life was simple, predictable, and fulfilling. But all of that changed one summer when strangers arrived at Daniel's doorstep. They weren't lost travelers or curious tourists. They were representatives from Sagebrush Heights Homeowners Association, HOA, a newly formed suburban development about 10 miles away. At first, Daniel thought their visit might be routine, a neighborly introduction perhaps. But what they told him turned his world upside down. The HOA needed water for its growing community, and after surveying the area, they decided to build a pipeline straight through Daniel's ranch. Daniel listened in stunned silence as they explained how the project would work. Bulldozers would carve trenches across his pastures, disrupting the very ground his family had nurtured for decades. Worse still, under eminent domain laws, he had almost no say in the matter. Eminent domain allowed the government or entities, like the HOA, to seize private property if it served public use, provided they compensated the owner fairly. To the HOA, Daniel's ranch was nothing more than an obstacle standing between them and progress. To Daniel, it was everything. Furious but determined, Daniel attended town hall meetings to voice his objections. He stood up in crowded rooms filled with developers, lawyers, and eager homeowners-to-be, pleading his case. "This isn't just dirt and grass," he argued passionately. "It's my livelihood, my heritage. You can't put a price tag on something like that." But his words fell on deaf ears. Developers dismissed his concerns, assuring everyone that the pipeline would bring jobs, prosperity, and modern amenities to the region. Most attendees sided with the HOA, excited about the prospect of new homes with lush lawns and sparkling swimming pools. When diplomacy failed, Daniel tried legal action. He hired attorneys and filed injunctions to halt construction. However, fighting the HOA proved costly and exhausting. Every courtroom battle drained his savings, leaving him financially strained. Some nights, sitting alone in his kitchen with stacks of legal documents scattered across the table, Daniel wondered if he was fighting a losing war. Yet, giving up wasn't an option. This was his land, and he refused to let anyone trample over it without a fight. As negotiations stalled and tensions escalated, construction crews moved onto Daniel's property anyway. One morning, he woke up to the deafening roar of heavy machinery. Dust clouds rose above his once pristine pastures as bulldozers tore into the earth. Watching from a distance, Daniel clenched his fists so tightly his knuckles turned white. He felt powerless, violated, and betrayed by a system that seemed designed to crush people like him. Still, deep inside, a spark of defiance began to burn, brighter than ever. That spark grew into a plan, one born out of frustration but fueled by determination. While Daniel couldn't stop the pipeline itself, he realized there was another way to strike back. Water flowed through those pipes, and controlling the source of that water could give him leverage. Late at night, unable to sleep, Daniel scoured old maps, legal codes, and historical records related to water rights in Montana. What he discovered gave him hope. Water rights could be bought and sold independently of land ownership. If he acted fast, he could gain control over the very resource the HOA depended on. With renewed purpose, Daniel set out to turn the tables. He knew this wouldn't be easy. It would require sacrifice, cunning, and sheer willpower. But he also knew it was his best shot at reclaiming some measure of justice. As the days passed, Daniel became consumed by his mission. Every waking moment revolved around finding ways to protect his land and punish those who dared to exploit it. Little did the HOA know, their decision to build a pipeline through Daniel Harper's ranch would unleash a chain of events neither side could have anticipated, and change both their fates forever. Daniel Harper sat at his kitchen table late, one night surrounded by papers, maps, and coffee-stained notebooks. The dim light from a single bulb cast long shadows across the room, but his mind was ablaze with ideas. He had spent hours poring over old documents and legal codes, searching for anything that could give him an edge against the HOA. That's when he stumbled upon something that made his heart race, a loophole so simple yet powerful that it felt like fate itself had placed it there. Water rights in Montana weren't automatically tied to land ownership. Instead, they were treated as separate entities that could be bought, sold, or transferred. This meant that even though the HOA was building a pipeline through his property, they didn't necessarily own the water flowing through it. If Daniel acted quickly enough, he could purchase the water rights not just for his own land but also for nearby properties upstream. And once he controlled the source of the water, he could decide where it went and who got access to it. And B. First, the idea seemed almost too audacious to work. Buying water rights would cost money Daniel didn't have. His legal battles with the HOA had already drained most of his savings, leaving him with barely enough to cover daily expenses. But this wasn't about money anymore. It was about sending a message. It was about showing the HOA that no matter how much power or influence they thought they had, they couldn't steamroll over someone without consequences. Determined to see his plan through, Daniel began reaching out to neighbors and local ranchers whose properties shared the same watershed. Many of them were skeptical at first. Some thought he was crazy, while others assumed he was trying to make a quick profit off their misfortune. "Why are you doing this?" one elderly rancher asked during a tense conversation over the phone. "You think you're going to get rich off water? Because if you are, count me out." But Daniel wasn't after riches. He explained his situation patiently, sharing stories of the bulldozers tearing up his fields and the developers ignoring his pleas. Slowly, some of his neighbors started to understand. They might not agree with all of Daniel's methods, but they respected his determination. And they hated the HOA just as much as he did. A few even offered to sell him their water rights at reduced prices, knowing full well what he intended to do with them. With each new agreement, Daniel grew more confident. He mortgaged everything he owned, the house he'd grown up in, the equipment he relied on for farming, even the cattle he'd raised since they were calves. It was a risky move, but Daniel believed it was worth it. Every penny he borrowed brought him closer to achieving his goal, controlling the flow of water that Sagebrush Heights depended on. As word of his actions spread, whispers rippled through the community. Some people admired Daniel's boldness, calling him a modern-day Robin Hood fighting for justice. Others dismissed him as reckless, warning that messing with water rights could lead to disaster. Even members of the HOA caught wind of what he was up to, though they initially underestimated its significance. To them, Daniel was just a stubborn rancher throwing tantrums because he couldn't accept change. What the HOA failed to realize, however, was that Daniel wasn't acting out of spite. He saw himself as a guardian, not just of his land, but of the entire ecosystem surrounding it. Water was life, and allowing the HOA to drain the area's resources unchecked would harm not only his ranch, but future generations as well. By taking control of the water rights, Daniel hoped to force the HOA to reconsider their priorities and recognize the value of sustainable development. By the time Daniel finalized his purchases, he controlled nearly 80% of the water feeding into the pipeline. With a sense of grim satisfaction, he began implementing the second phase of his plan. Using old irrigation systems left behind by his grandfather, along with newly installed dams and diversion channels, he redirected the water away from the HOA's intake points. Streams that once flowed freely into the pipeline now pooled behind barriers or veered off course entirely. Within weeks, the effects became impossible to ignore. In Sagebrush Heights, faucets sputtered and ran dry. Lawns turned brown, swimming. Pools sat empty, and residents scrambled to figure out what had gone wrong. Panic set in as rumors spread about sabotage or contamination. No one suspected Daniel, at least not yet. From his vantage point on the hill overlooking his ranch, Daniel watched the chaos unfold below with mixed emotions. Part of him felt guilty for causing hardship to innocent families caught in the crossfire, but another part felt vindicated. knowing that the HOA was finally experiencing the same frustration and helplessness he'd endured for months. For Daniel, this wasn't about revenge, it was about balance. The HOA had taken his land for granted, assuming he was powerless to stop them. Now they were learning the hard way that every action has consequences. As the days passed and tensions mounted, Daniel braced himself for the inevitable backlash. Lawsuits, threats, and accusations were sure to follow, but none of that mattered to him anymore. He had drawn a line in the sand, or rather in the water, and dared the HOA to cross it. Whatever happened next, Daniel knew one thing for certain. He had proven that even the war over water had officially begun, and Daniel Harper was ready to fight with everything he had. After securing the majority of the water rights upstream, he wasted no time putting his plan into motion. He knew that controlling the water wasn't enough. He had to make sure the HOA felt the full weight of their decision to build a pipeline through his land. Every drop of water diverted from the pipeline was a message, loud and clear. You can take my land, but you won't take my dignity. Daniel started by reviving old irrigation systems that had been abandoned years ago. These rusty pipes and weathered channels crisscrossed his property like scars from another era, remnants of when his grandfather used them to water crops during dry summers. With some elbow grease and late-night tinkering, Daniel patched leaks, replaced broken parts, and rerouted the flow of water away from the pipeline. Then came the dams, small but effective structures built along streams feeding into the watershed. Each dam acted as a gatekeeper, holding back water until Daniel decided where it should go. At first, the changes went unnoticed. The HOA's engineers probably assumed minor fluctuations in water levels were normal, an expected hiccup while the pipeline was still new. But as days turned into weeks, the trickle of water flowing into Sagebrush Heights slowed to a crawl. Residents began noticing strange things happening around town. Showers sputtered out mid-lather. Dishwashers refused to fill. Lawns, once green and lush, started turning brown and brittle. At first, people blamed faulty plumbing or drought conditions, but soon it became impossible to ignore the truth. Something or someone was cutting off their water supply. News of the crisis spread quickly, sparking outrage among Sagebrush Heights residents. Parents worried about bathing their children. Business owners fretted over lost revenue as car washes closed and restaurants scaled back operations. Community meetings erupted into shouting matches as tempers flared. "Who's doing this?" one angry homeowner demanded at a packed town hall meeting. "Is this some kind of terrorist attack?" Meanwhile, the HOA scrambled to find answers. Engineers inspected every inch of the pipeline, searching for leaks or blockages. They tested water quality, checked pressure gauges, and even sent drones flying over nearby rivers and streams. Nothing seemed amiss, except for the fact that there simply wasn't enough water reaching the intake points. Frustrated and desperate, the HOA called emergency press conferences, assuring panicked residents that they were working tirelessly to resolve the issue. Behind closed doors, however, tensions ran high. Someone within the organization must have suspected Daniel's involvement, but without concrete evidence, they couldn't point fingers. For Daniel, watching the chaos unfold was both satisfying and surreal. From his perch on a hill overlooking the ranch, he could see the effects of his actions rippling outward. Dried-up creeks glistened faintly under the sun, their beds cracked and barren. Downstream, sprinklers in Sagebrush Heights sat idle, surrounded by patches of dead grass. It was strange to think that such a simple act, redirecting water, could bring an entire community to its knees. Yet despite the mounting pressure, Daniel remained calm. He wasn't doing this to hurt innocent people. He was doing it to protect what mattered most. Still, the backlash hit hard and fast. Local newspapers ran stories accusing Daniel of sabotage, environmental harm, and endangering public safety. One headline read, "Rancher turns water tyrant. Is this justice or revenge?" Neighbors who once sympathized with him now looked at him with suspicion. Even some of his closest friends began questioning whether he'd gone too far. "You're playing God, Daniel. one longtime acquaintance told him during a tense phone call. "This isn't just about your land anymore, you're messing with people's lives." But Daniel didn't back down. If anything, the criticism only strengthened his resolve. He knew the HOA would try to paint him as the villain. It was easier than admitting their own greed had caused the problem. So, instead of retreating, Daniel leaned into the controversy. He invited reporters to tour his ranch, showing them exactly how the pipeline cut through his fields and disrupted his livelihood. He shared photos of bulldozers tearing up fertile soil and explained how the HOA had ignored his concerns every step of the way. His message was simple. They took my land without asking. Now they're learning what it feels like to be powerless. The standoff dragged on. Emotions reached a boiling point. Angry residents organized protests outside Daniel's property, waving signs that read, "Water is a right." "Kinda shame on you, Harper." Some even vandalized his fences or left threatening notes on his gate. Late one night, Daniel woke to the sound of gunshots echoing in the distance. Rushing outside, he found bullet holes peppering the side of his barn. Fear gripped him for a moment, but it quickly gave way to anger. They could intimidate him all they wanted, but he wouldn't fold. Not now, not ever. Surprisingly, not everyone turned against Daniel. Environmental activists caught wind of his story and praised him for exposing the dangers of unchecked development. Social media buzzed with hashtags like 4 years stand with Harper and Beer protect our water, drawing attention to the broader issue of resource management. A few neighboring ranchers, inspired by Daniel's defiance, joined forces to help protect shared water sources. Together, they formed an informal coalition, pooling resources and knowledge to ensure the HOA couldn't exploit anyone else. Despite the growing support, Daniel knew the battle was far from over. The HOA still held significant power, backed by wealthy investors and influential politicians. Legal challenges loomed on the horizon, and Daniel braced himself for a long, grueling fight. But deep down, he felt a sense of pride. For years, he'd been just another faceless farmer, invisible to the world beyond his fence line. Now he was a symbol, a reminder that even the smallest voice could stand up to giants if it refused to stay silent. Every morning, Daniel walked the length of his property, checking the dams and irrigation systems to ensure they were working properly. As he stood by the edge of a newly constructed reservoir, watching sunlight dance across the surface of the water, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. This fight wasn't just about revenge or justice, it was about legacy. Someday, when the dust settled and the headlines faded, people might remember him as the man who dared to challenge the system. And maybe, just maybe, they'd learn something from his story. That water is more than just a commodity. It's life itself. The tension in Sagebrush Heights had reached a fever pitch, and the HOA was running out of options. Their once pristine suburban dream was crumbling before their eyes, and panic was spreading like wildfire. Lawns that were supposed to be green and manicured now resembled dusty wastelands. Swimming pools sat empty, their bottoms cracked from neglect. Even basic necessities like showers and laundry became luxuries few could afford. The residents, who had moved to Sagebrush Heights for its promise of comfort and modern living, were now furious, and they wanted answers. Desperate to regain control, the HOA launched a full-scale legal assault against Daniel Harper. Armed with teams of high-powered attorneys, they filed lawsuits accusing him of everything from environmental harm to violating public utility regulations. They claimed his dams and irrigation systems were disrupting natural water flows, causing ecological damage downstream. In press releases, they painted Daniel as a reckless vigilante, someone who cared more about revenge than the well-being of innocent families. "This isn't just about one man's property," an HOA spokesperson declared during a televised interview. "It's about protecting our community and ensuring everyone has access to clean, safe water." But Daniel wasn't intimidated. He knew the HOA's accusations were nothing more than smoke and mirrors, designed to distract from their own misdeeds. After all, it was their pipeline that had invaded his land without consent. It was their greed that had prioritized luxury, homes over sustainable development. And now, when faced with consequences, They tried to shift the blame onto him. Instead of backing down, Daniel doubled down, hiring his own lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Clara Bennett, who specialized in environmental law. Together, they prepared to fight back in court, determined to expose the truth. The legal battle quickly became a media circus. Reporters flocked to Sagebrush Heights, eager to capture the drama unfolding between the defiant rancher and the powerful HOA. News vans lined the roads leading to Daniel's property, their satellite dishes pointing skyward like mechanical sunflowers. Camera crews followed him as he checked his dams or repaired fences, peppering him with questions. "Are you trying to punish these people?" one reporter asked, thrusting a microphone into his face. Daniel stopped mid-stride, squinting against the glare of the cameras. "I'm not punishing anyone," he replied evenly. "I'm standing up for what's right. If they don't like it, maybe they should have thought twice before taking my land." While the media circus raged on, tensions escalated on both sides. Protesters gathered outside Daniel's ranch daily, chanting slogans and holding signs demanding justice. Some carried banners reading, "Water is life," while others scrawled harsher messages like, "Harper must go." Across cardboard, placards. At night, the protests turned uglier. Rocks were thrown at Daniel's windows. His mailbox was smashed repeatedly. Anonymous callers left threatening voicemails, warning him to stop messing with us or face the consequences. Despite the intimidation tactics, Daniel refused to budge. Every threat only deepened his resolve. Amid the chaos, cracks began to form within the Sagebrush Heights community itself. Not everyone sided with the HOA. Some residents, particularly those who had grown up in rural areas, sympathized with Daniel. They understood the importance of water rights and saw the HOA's actions as predatory. "They came in here thinking they could take whatever they wanted," said Sarah Collins, a mother of 3 who had recently moved to Sagebrush Heights. "But this isn't just about water. It's about respect. You can't bulldoze your way through someone's life and expect them to roll over." Others took action beyond words. A small group of homeowners organized fundraisers to support Daniel's legal defense, collecting donations at local coffee shops and farmers markets. Environmental activists joined forces with these dissenters, hosting rallies to raise awareness about sustainable resource management. Social media played a crucial role too, amplifying Daniel's story far beyond Montana. Hashtags like Tashi Fairwater Rights and Tashi Stop Corporate Greed trended nationwide, drawing attention from lawmakers and advocacy groups alike. Still, the HOA wasn't about to give up without a fight. Behind closed doors, they strategized ways to discredit Daniel and regain public support. Corporate sponsors funneled money into PR campaigns, portraying Sagebrush Heights as a victim of rural extremism. Lobbyists leaned on local politicians, urging them to intervene on behalf of the HOA. There were even whispers of federal agencies stepping in, citing national interests in maintaining infrastructure projects. As the pressure mounted, Daniel found himself stretched thin. Between court appearances, media interviews, and tending to his ranch, there were days when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him. Yet every time he felt like giving up, he reminded himself why he started this fight in the first place. He thought about his grandfather, who had taught him the value of hard work and perseverance. He thought about the generations of Harpers who had called this land home. And he thought about the future, the kind of world he wanted to leave behind for his children if he ever had any. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across his fields, Daniel climbed to the top of a hill overlooking his property. From here he could see the entire scope of the conflict, the pipeline cutting through his pastures, the dried-up streams winding toward Sagebrush Heights, and the distant glow of streetlights marking the edge of suburbia. For a moment he allowed himself to imagine what peace might look like, a world where developers respected private property, where communities worked together instead of tearing each other apart, where water flowed freely without fear of exploitation. But peace felt like a distant dream right now. Tomorrow would bring another round of arguments in court, another wave of angry protesters, another sleepless night spent guarding his fences. Still, Daniel smiled faintly as he gazed out at the landscape. No matter how hard the HOA pushed, no matter how loud the critics shouted, he knew one thing for certain. He had already won the most important battle. He had stood up to a system that sought to silence him, and in doing so, he had sparked a conversation that couldn't be ignored. Whether the HOA liked it or not, the war over water had changed the rules, and Daniel Harper was leading the charge. The battle between Daniel Harper and the Sagebrush Heights HOA had become more than just a local dispute. It was now a symbol of larger struggles playing out across the country. On one side stood the forces of unchecked development, eager to pave over farmland and reroute natural resources for profit. On the other stood those fighting to preserve the land, its history, and the delicate balance of nature. As the conflict dragged on, unexpected allies began stepping forward, drawn by Daniel's unyielding determination and the moral clarity of his cause. Environmental activists were among the first to rally behind him. Groups like Save Our Streams and Montana Water Watch sent volunteers to help maintain Daniel's dams and irrigation systems. They also launched educational campaigns, holding workshops in nearby towns to teach residents about water conservation and sustainable living. One activist, a fiery young woman named Elena Torres, became a regular presence on Daniel's ranch. Armed with a clipboard and an unshakable belief in justice, she helped organize protests and spread awareness online. "This isn't just about Daniel," she told reporters during a live stream from the ranch. "It's about protecting our planet. If we let big corporations take whatever they want, there won't be anything left for future generations." Local ranchers, too, started joining the fight. At first, many had been hesitant, unsure whether Daniel's actions would backfire or drag them into costly legal battles. But as the HOA's tactics grew increasingly aggressive, threatening lawsuits against anyone suspected of supporting Daniel, the tide began to turn. Neighboring farmers realized that if Daniel fell, they could be next. So, they banded together, pooling resources to strengthen their collective bargaining power. Some even offered to sell additional water rights to Daniel at below-market rates, knowing full well how he intended to use them. One such ally was Frank Callahan, a grizzled cattle rancher whose family had lived in the area for nearly a century. Frank had initially dismissed Daniel as reckless, but after seeing the HOA bulldoze through yet another neighbor's property, he changed his tune. "You're either with them or against them," Frank said one evening, sitting around a campfire with Daniel and a handful of other ranchers. "And I reckon I'd rather go down swinging than roll over and play dead." With Frank's support came not only water rights but also manpower. His sons pitched in to repair fences, while his wife organized food drives for Daniel, ensuring he didn't go hungry amidst the chaos. Despite this growing coalition, the HOA wasn't backing down. In fact, their desperation only seemed to fuel their aggression. Corporate sponsors poured money into smear campaigns, painting Daniel as a radical extremist bent on destroying Sagebrush Heights. Billboards went up along highways featuring photos of dried-up lawns and empty swimming pools alongside slogans like, "Don't let one man steal your water." Local news outlets ran biased segments quoting anonymous experts who claimed Daniel's actions were causing irreversible environmental damage. The message was clear: paint Daniel as the villain, and hope public opinion turned against him. But the strategy backfired in unexpected ways. Instead of vilifying Daniel, the smear campaigns often highlighted the very issues he was fighting against. Viewers tuning in to hear about the crazy rancher instead found themselves questioning why the HOA needed so much water in the first place. Why were sprawling suburbs being built in areas prone to drought? Who benefited from draining rivers and streams dry? Online forums buzzed with debates, and hashtags like Fire Water Justice and War Stop Corporate Abuse gained traction nationwide. Even celebrities weighed in, sharing Daniel's story with millions of followers and urging fans to support grassroots movements advocating for fair resource management. Meanwhile, tensions within Sagebrush Heights continued to simmer. Residents remained divided, with some blaming Daniel for their hardships and others pointing fingers at the HOA. Arguments erupted at grocery stores, school board meetings, and even church potlucks. One particularly heated exchange occurred at a community center where two neighbors, a retired teacher named Margaret and a construction worker named Joe, nearly came to blows over whose fault the water shortage really was. "This is all because of Harper," Joe shouted, slamming his fist on a table. "If he'd just let us have our water, none of this would have happened." Margaret shot back, her voice trembling with anger. "No, it's because of greed. The pipeline shouldn't have been built in the first place." Amid the divisiveness, however, moments of unity emerged. A group of teenagers organized a cleanup day, gathering trash from dried-up creeks and planting native vegetation to restore habitats. Families volunteered at food banks, recognizing that rising tensions made life harder for everyone. Slowly, but surely, people began to realize that pointing fingers wouldn't solve the problem. They needed solutions, not scapegoats. For Daniel, these small acts of solidarity meant everything. He knew the road ahead would still be long and difficult, but seeing others step up reminded him why he kept fighting. Late one night, as he sat on his porch watching fireflies dance in the darkness, Elena joined him, clutching a thermos of coffee. "You ever think about quitting?" she asked softly. Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "Every damn day," he admitted. "But then I remember what my grandpa used to say. A man's worth ain't measured by what he owns, but by what he stands for. And right now I'm standing for something bigger than myself." Helena smiled, handing him the thermos. "Well, you're not alone anymore. Whether it's farmers, activists, or pissed-off moms sick of brown lawns, people are waking up. You lit a fire under them, Daniel. Now it's burning brighter than ever." As dawn broke the next morning, Daniel climbed onto his tractor, ready to start another day of work. The war over water showed no signs of ending anytime soon, but for the first time in months, he felt a flicker of hope. Allies surrounded him, both near and far. Together they had proven that even the smallest voice could spark change, and that sometimes the loudest roar came from standing your ground. With the agreement signed and the water flowing again, Daniel Harper's life began to settle into a new rhythm. The chaos of the past months, the protests, the lawsuits, the endless negotiations, had left him physically and emotionally drained. But as he stood on his porch one crisp morning, watching sunlight dance across the fields, he felt a profound sense of peace. His land was scarred, yes, but it was still alive. And so was he. The pipeline that once symbolized oppression now belonged to him, a tool he could use however he saw fit. Working with engineers and neighbors, Daniel repurposed parts of it to create an efficient irrigation system for his ranch. Streams that had been diverted during the standoff were slowly restored, allowing fish and wildlife to return to their natural habitats. It wasn't perfect. Some areas would take years to fully recover, but every day brought visible signs of renewal. Wildflowers bloomed along creek beds, and songbirds returned to nest in the cottonwood trees near the barn. Life was finding its way back. Word of Daniel's victory spread far beyond Montana. Journalists from across the country visited his ranch, eager to document the story of the man who dared to challenge a powerful HOA. Documentaries aired on national television, highlighting not just the legal battle, but also the broader issues of resource management, rural rights, and corporate accountability. Social media buzzed with admiration for Daniel, with hashtags like Rar Water Warrior and Ram Stand with Harper trending long after the conflict ended. Environmental groups invited him to speak at conferences, where his straightforward wisdom resonated deeply with audiences. "You don't have to be rich or famous to make a difference," he told one crowd in a packed auditorium. "Sometimes all it takes is standing your ground when everyone else says you can't." But fame wasn't what Daniel sought. He remained humble, content to live the quiet life he'd always known. Neighbors who had once doubted him now greeted him warmly, offering help with repairs or sharing meals during busy harvest seasons. Even some former critics from Sagebrush Heights reached out, apologizing for their harsh words and thanking him for forcing them to rethink their priorities. One woman, whose family had struggled through the water shortage, sent Daniel a handwritten letter expressing her gratitude. "I didn't understand why you did what you did at first," she wrote. "But now I see that you weren't trying to hurt us. You were trying to teach us. Thank you." Daniel framed the letter and hung it on the wall of his kitchen, a reminder of how far both sides had come. Reconciliation wasn't easy. It required patience, understanding, and a willingness to listen, but it proved possible even in the most divided circumstances. In Sagebrush Heights, life moved forward, though not without lasting changes. Many residents decided to adopt more sustainable practices, swapping lush lawns for drought-resistant landscaping and installing rainwater collection systems. Community gardens sprouted up around town, fostering a spirit of cooperation that hadn't existed before. Some even organized trips to Daniel's ranch, eager to learn about farming and conservation firsthand. These visits became a kind of bridge between two worlds, urban and rural, that had once seemed irreconcilable. For the HOA, the aftermath was less forgiving. Public trust in the organization plummeted, leading to resignations among top executives and calls for greater transparency. Developers canceled plans for several large-scale projects, citing concerns about backlash from environmental activists and local communities. The moratorium Daniel secured ensured that agricultural lands within a 50-mile radius would remain protected for decades to come, providing a buffer against unchecked expansion. Though the HOA tried to spin the outcome as a lesson learned, few believed their promises of reform. As years passed, Daniel's story became legend, a modern-day David versus Goliath tale taught in classrooms and discussed at dinner tables. Visitors driving past his ranch often spotted a weathered wooden sign nailed to a fence post near the entrance. Painted in bold black letters were the words, "Water is life. Don't take it for granted." Tourists stopped to snap photos of the sign, while locals nodded knowingly as they drove by. To them, it wasn't just a slogan, it was a philosophy, born from struggle and sacrifice. Daniel himself grew older, his hair streaked with gray and his hands calloused from years of hard work. Yet his spirit remained unbroken. He spent his days tending to his cattle, repairing fences and mentoring young farmers eager to follow in his footsteps. When asked if he regretted any part of his fight against the HOA, he always gave the same answer. Regret doesn't do much good. What matters is learning from the past and making sure we don't repeat our mistakes. On clear nights, Daniel liked to sit on his porch, staring up at the stars scattered across the vast Montana sky. He thought about his grandfather, who had worked this same land decades ago, and wondered what he might think of everything that had happened. Would he be proud? Amused? Or maybe just relieved that someone finally stood up to those who thought they could take whatever they wanted? Whatever the answer, Daniel knew one thing for certain. He had done right by the land and by himself. In fighting for justice, he had found purpose, and in protecting his home, he had preserved something far greater, a legacy of resilience, courage, and hope. Years later, when a young journalist asked him how he managed to persevere against such overwhelming odds, Daniel smiled softly. "It's simple," he said. "When someone tells you no, sometimes the best thing you can do is say yes, to yourself, to your values, to the things that matter most. That's where true strength comes from." And with that, Daniel tipped his hat, turned back toward his fields, and walked away, a living testament to the power of determination and the enduring bond between people and the earth they call home.